I think of people as beasts of burden in some sense. Like we're built for a burden, and we're not happy without that burden, and we want to find the one that suits us, and that's difficult. It's part of the adventure of life to seek out the burden that suits you. But when you have that, then yes, then hopefully you're operating in harmony with the requirements of those around you. And the thing to me is that everything else pales in comparison to that. That's why it says in the New Testament that you should stack up riches in heaven. It's like there isn't anything better than that. You're functioning well, your family's functioning well, you're contributing to your community. What you're doing is worthwhile, You're not tormented by your conscience. You're aiming at something that the sacrifices that you have to make that clearly justify the sacrifices you have to make. Maybe even the sacrifice of your life, because you're in this, like this is a mortal game. You're in this with your whole life. And you'd think that what that would mean, at least in part, is that you need to find a game to play that's of sufficient grandeur and nobility so that perhaps even the fact that mortality is built into the structure now becomes justifiable. I mean, it's a hell of an ambition. But it doesn't seem to me to be something that's impossible. I think you can live your life enough so that it justifies itself despite its limitations. That's the real question. Can you do that? And I believe that you can, and I believe that what that means is that the human spirit fundamentally triumphs over death. And so that's optimism, in the midst of the sorrow and the malevolence. We have the capacity to transcend that. And there isn't anything more optimistic than that. And there's nothing in it that isn't good. Right? It's good for you. It's good for the people you love. It's good for the broader society. It's like it's good. And that'll take you through your times of travail. There isn't anything else that will. And then maybe on your deathbed you can think, I justified the privilege, the terrible privilege of my existence. And maybe that's good enough. It's possible that that's good enough. You certainly don't have anything better to do than that, as far as I can tell. I talked to one of the people that I was working with who had a vision for retirement. I said, well, what's your vision for retirement? Well, I see myself in the beach, some tropical country drinking margaritas. And I thought, first, that's not a plan. That's a travel poster. It's like, okay, let's walk through this. All right, so you go down to this tropical country and you go sit on the beach and you have a margarita. It's like, okay, well, how many margaritas? Like 10? Okay, so going to do that. What, going to do that for 6 months?
You'll be dead.
Yeah, well, you'll be this pathetic, sunburned,
fat.
Unhappy, hungover, cirrhotic.
In pain.
Yeah, it's like that's your vision. So how long can you have a margarita on a beach? Like maybe you can do that once every 6 months for 10 minutes, something like that. It's not a vision. It's like this 16-year-old fantasy of paradise. It's like, well, and it just doesn't work out. So, and the thing is that the thing that sustains people through life really is the lifting of a worthwhile burden. It's something like that. Yeah. And it's partly because we're social animals, right? It's like we're evolved to be useful to the people around us because they're much more likely to let us live if we're like that. Yeah. So, and it's been very fun especially talking to young men about this. It's like, well, and that's the other thing too, is I think the world is full of darkness, let's say. And we could say each of us have a little bit of light. And if we release that light, if we let it shine properly, Christ, it's too cliched to go on with in some sense, but the world is a lesser place if you do not reveal from within yourself what you have to reveal. And the fact that the world is a lesser place actually turns out not to be trivial. Like, if you aren't everything you could be, more people will die, more people will suffer, more evil will be unconstrained, more tyranny will reign, more chaos will remain chaotic and dangerous, all of that.
Do you mean this in the sense of like the old proverb of the wings of a butterfly fluttering become a hurricane?
It's something similar to that, but it can even be more local. It's like your family is more messed up than it could be if you were less messed up than you are.
Right.
So if you just got your act together, like 10% more, your family would be 1% better.
Right.
It's like, well, do it.
And that would ripple off into the people that they interact with.
Yes, and it ripples fast.
Yes.
That's the other thing that's so cool, is that, like, people think, well, there's 7 billion of us, and each of us is just this separate dust mote, like floating in the cosmos, and what the hell difference does it make what you do anyways? It's like, that is not how we're connected. It's like, you're the center of a network, and you know way more people than this, but let's say typically, you're going to know 1,000 people in your life, well enough to have an impact on them. Okay? And each of those 1,000 people is going to know 1,000 people. So you're 1 step from 1,000,000 and 2 steps from 1,000,000,000. And we are networked, technically. That's how human interactions work. And so when you do something that you shouldn't do, it's worse than you think. And when you do something that you should do, it's better than you think. And so you think, well, this is why I've been telling people, well, clean up your room. It's like, well, your room is actually networked too. It's not that easy to clean up your room, to set it. So you want your room to be set up so that when you walk in there, it tells you to be better than you generally are. It's organized. It's got direction. Everything's in its place. You try to do that in a chaotic household. You know, I've watched people do this because I had students do these sorts of things as assignments. I'd say, look, pick a small moral goal, clean up your room, and just write down what happens as a consequence. So maybe these are students in a chaotic household. The whole place is a bloody mess. No one's taking any responsibility for anything. And so they decide they're going to start to clean up their room. And then the people in the household notice. Well, the first thing they do is get pissed off. It's like, who do you think you are? Like, you think you're better than us? It's like, why do you think this is worthwhile? Who died and made you God? All of that. So just by trying to organize this little part of their life, they immediately run into the people whose actions they're casting in a dim light by trying to improve themselves to some degree. They might have to have like a thorough war in their household to be allowed to do something as simple as keep the room orderly. You'll find out very rapidly that A, that's way more difficult than it sounds, and B, that the consequences of it are far more far-reaching than people think. Maybe part of it is that like everything around you is full of potential. Everything. Maybe more potential than you could ever possibly utilize. And so maybe all you have is this little rat hole of a room in some rundown place in the world. It's like, fix it up. There's more there than you think. See what happens if you fix it up. And you'll fix yourself up simultaneously because you'll have to get disciplined in order to fix up the room. And then you have a fixed up room and you'll be a more fixed up person. It's like, you think that nothing will happen as a consequence of that? Another client I worked with was having a hard time putting his kid to bed at night. And so we did the arithmetic. It's like, well, I'm fighting with my kid for 45 minutes a night trying to get him to go to bed. Okay, so let's analyze that. All right, so what does that mean? Well, it means that both of you end the day upset. That's not so good, because why would you want that? It means that you're spending 45 minutes fighting when you could spend 20 minutes doing something positive, like reading to him, say. It means that you don't get to spend that time with your wife, so she's not very happy with you, plus you're annoyed because you don't see her, plus you blame it on the kid because he's the proximal cause. It's like, that's pretty damn ugly. And then let's do the arithmetic. It's like 7 days a week, 45 minutes a day. Let's call that 5 hours, 20 hours a week, 240 hours in a year. It's 6. You're spending a month and a half of work weeks fighting with your 4-year-old son. Think you're going to like him? You don't like anyone you spend a month and a half a year fighting with. It's a bad idea. Fix it. It's important. Get him to bed. Make it peaceful. You do it like these things that repeat every single day. That's a motif in this book too. Your life isn't margaritas on a beach in Jamaica. That happens now and then. Those are exceptions. Your life is how your wife greets you at the door when you come home every day. Because that's like 10 minutes a day. Your life is how you treat each other over the breakfast table. Because that's an hour and a half or an hour every single day. you get those mundane things right, those things you do every day. You concentrate on them and you make them pristine. It's like you got 80% of your life put together. These little things that are right in front of us, they're not little. That's the first thing. They are not little, and they're hard to set right. And if you set them right, it has a rippling effect, and fast too, way faster than people think. One of the things I've been suggesting to people is that they pick something difficult to do. I read this funny little paragraph by Kierkegaard. It was written about 1840, and he was thinking about his role as a student and writer. And he was a student and writer forever. You know, he never really had a career apart from that. And he said that he wasn't one of these people who was capable of inventing something wonderful to make life easier for everyone, like so many people were doing, you know, during the Industrial Revolution. He said, well, maybe I'm one of these people whose benefit to society will be that I will make things more difficult for everyone, because there will come a time when what people want, they don't want ease, they want difficulty instead. And I think, well, that is what people want. That is what they want. You think, well, I want an easy, happy life. It's like, no, actually, that isn't what you want.
I think what people want is things that are difficult that they can overcome.
Yeah, right. That's right. They want an optimal challenge.
Well,
that's a whole different thing.
When you overcome something, when you do something difficult, whether it's, I mean, I've never written a book, but I assume when you write a book, when you're done writing that book, there's a great feeling of accomplishment, because it's very difficult to do. That feeling of for me, it's like when I put together a comedy special, or when I, you know, just anything that's difficult. There's a feeling like I did it. I did it.
Yeah, well, one of the mysteries is why that feeling exists. You know, it's not a trivial thing, that. It's to say, I did something difficult and that was worthwhile. Basically, what you're saying to yourself is, well, there was a lot of suffering attendant on that, along with the just general suffering of life, but it turned out that was worth it. That's what you want. It's like you want that sense that you're engaged in something that's worth it. Not like a casual optimist about these sorts of things. I mean, one of the things I do in 12 Rules for Life is lay out the rationale that drives people like the Columbine High School killers. Because I understand that rationale. I've studied it for a long time. I know why they did what they did. And they have a powerful argument, but it's wrong. But there's no sense in showing how it's wrong before showing that it's a powerful argument. Like life is suffering. There is lots of malevolence. It's no wonder that people want to bring being itself to a halt. They want to take revenge on it. It's not surprising. It's the wrong way of going about it. The right way is, it's akin to the sorts of things that you were just observing. Is you take on a difficult task that pushes you past where you are already. And you succeed in it, and you get this sense that, yes, that was worthwhile. It's like that's what you want. You want to live in that place where things are worthwhile. That's paradise on earth. That's what that is. And it isn't some happy little place where, you know, someone's feeding you peeled grapes. That isn't what it is. It's more like victory on the honorable battlefield or something like that. There's a city, and the city is full of people who are sinful. What does that mean? Well, to sin is an archery term. It means to miss the mark. So these are people who aren't oriented properly. And so the city is in a chaotic state. And God tells Jonah that he's going to go to that city and tell them just exactly what's up with them. And Jonah thinks, no, I'm not going to do that. And why? Well, that doesn't require much explanation. It's like, how popular are you going to be if you go to a city full of chaotic people and tell them why they're stupid and wrong? Jonah thinks, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't care if God's telling me to do it. So his conscience is telling him to do it, or his destiny is telling him to do it, or his orientation with higher morality is telling him to do it. You can read it any way you want. And so he thinks, no, I'm hopping on this boat and I'm getting as far away from that city as I possibly can. And so he does that, and then the storm comes up because God thinks, no, you're not getting away. If I told you to do something, you're not getting away from it. A storm comes up. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's easy. Betray your destiny and see how long it takes you to be drowning in a storm. It'll happen immediately, and of course it will, because what's calling you to be your best is exactly the thing that's pushing you forward to manifest yourself most fully in the world. It's what you need. You run away from that, the boat's going to start to rock very, very quickly. Well, and you all know that. You know that perfectly well. hell, all you have to do is not study for an exam that you know that's coming up to see everything the storm waters start to rise and everything start to rock. It's pretty bloody obvious. So anyways, he's on this boat and there's a storm, and all of the people on the boat who can't quite discriminate chaos from weather because they haven't differentiated the world to that degree think, oh, the boat wouldn't be about to be swamped if some of us hadn't done something stupid and wrong. And there's logic in that. You might think, well, God has nothing personal against you because of the storm, so you're confusing levels of analysis. But you got to give these people some credit. It's like, maybe they did do something stupid. Maybe they didn't caulk the damn boat properly. Maybe the ropes aren't in as good a shape as they might be. Maybe they weren't paying attention to the weather when they went out on the ocean. Or maybe they haven't made peace with their brother, and so their hearts are bent, twisted out of shape, so they don't make particularly good sailors. It's like the idea that you encounter a storm because you're stupid and wrong is a really good idea, even though it's not of infinite applicability. Anyways, they draw lots. It's a primitive thing to do. It's like, well, it's someone's fault. We don't know who. We're going to throw someone overboard, the worst sinner. Obviously, that's what God wants, some kind of sacrifice. So they all draw lots, and someone loses. And then Jonah stands up and says, well, sorry guys, I know that I've got a problem with God at the moment, so it's probably me. You better throw me over. And they don't really want to, but he finally convinces them. Over he goes. And the storm settles. Well, sometimes if you're in a group of people in an organization, there is someone in the organization whose head isn't screwed on exactly straight. And they know exactly why it is and what they've done wrong and what puts them in that position. And they are poisoning the entire enterprise. And if you throw them overboard, or better, if they agree voluntarily to leave, then the storm will abate and everything will be okay. So anyways, they throw Jonah overboard, and a whale comes up and swallows him and takes him down to the bottom of the ocean. Well, we already know what that means because we watched Pinocchio. It's like when God abandons you because you've abandoned your destiny and the storms come up, the probability that you're going to be taken down to the depths is extraordinarily high, and that happens in people's lives all the time. Also down there, Jonah repents. Well, what do you do when you're in the underworld? You've been there before when things fall apart on you. Your friends have abandoned you. You're not as popular as you could be. You can't stand to look at yourself in the mirror. Into the underworld you go, and you think, geez, I've done a lot of things wrong. Maybe I should reconcile myself with the world and I could get out of this. Well, so that's what Jonah does. He thinks, all right, I've got this destiny. I better go do what God says. So the whale spits him out onto the beach, and off he goes to the city to tell them what's wrong. Well, that's what that represents. That's these symbols, It's so cool. This second one I really like. It's so interesting because you see Jonah re-emerging from the whale, and he's got a halo around his head. You say, well, what's a halo? Well, have you ever looked at a quarter? Well, think about a quarter. A quarter's the moon. And who's on the quarter? The queen. The queen is surrounded by the halo of the moon. The queen's queen of the night. Gold coin, that's the king's head on the sun. That's the halo. Well, what comes out of the belly of the fish? It's the illuminated human being. It's the spirit of the illuminated human being. That's what that means. Well, what does that mean? Well, what else would come out of chaos? If you fall apart and then you put yourself back together, what is it that comes back out? Well, at least you're in better shape than you were before, and then maybe you do that 20 times in your life, or 50 times, and you do it voluntarily. Every time you do it, you're more like the thing with the halo, and less like the thing that's, being thrown overboard by your friends. And the Midianites sold Joseph into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites which had brought him down thither. So now he's a slave. So now you'd think, well, this is a man who has a lot of reason to be irritated at the structure of reality, right? He's gone from being the favorite to being betrayed by all of his brothers. That's pretty rough. And then he's being transformed into a slave, and now he's being sold to work as a slave. So you'd think that would corrupt his character. Because, one of the things, I think this is the case anyways, I think people are always looking for an excuse to have their character corrupted. Because if your character is corrupted, then you get to lie, and you get to cheat, and you get to steal, and you get to betray, and you get to act resentfully, and you get to do nothing. And that's all easy. It's easier to lie than to tell the truth. It's easier to do nothing than to do something. So there's always part of you thinking, well, I need a justification for being useless and horrible, because that'd be a lot less work. And so then if something terrible comes along, you think, aha, that's just exactly the excuse that I was waiting for. And then out all that comes. You know, Solzhenitsyn, when he was in the concentration camps in Russia, watching how people behaved, you know, he said that there were people that were put in the camps who immediately became trustees or guards, and they were even more vicious than the people who had been hired as guards. And his idea was that they had collected all that, called it foulness, if I remember correctly, around them in normal life. But they didn't have the opportunity to express it. But as soon as you gave them the opportunity, it was like, there it was, right away. So one of the messages that seems to echo through these Old Testament stories is that just because something terrible happens to you doesn't mean that you get to wander off the path and make things worse. And maybe it doesn't matter how terrible it is that what happens to you. And that's a tough call, you know, because you see people now and then in life who they've really got it rough, man. Like 50 bad things are happening to them at the same time, and you think, well, it's no wonder. If you were bitter and resentful and hostile, it'd be like, yeah, no wonder. But then you meet people, and Solzhenitsyn again talked about this movie like archipelagos, and he met lots of people in the, not lots, he met enough people to impress him in the concentration camp system who didn't allow their misfortunes to corrupt them. And that's something. Because maybe the only real misfortune is to become corrupted. That's a really useful thing to think. You know, maybe the rest of it is trivial in comparison. I know that's a rough thing because you can be in very harsh circumstances, but I do think there's something to that. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So that's an echo of the idea that we encountered earlier about walking with God, right? So Adam walked with God before he ate the fruit with Eve, and then he wouldn't walk with God. And then Noah walked with God, and Abraham walked with God. And so the idea is, well, that's that alignment with the highest ideal. I think it's something like that. And you know, we could think about that as a metaphysical claim as well. But I don't think it is. I mean, I've got thousands of letters now in the last year from people who have told me that they were in a pit. That's exactly right. And that they decided that they were going to try to put their lives together. And that it worked. And so that's really something, you know, and they write surprised. It's like, well, I decided that I was going to work hard at what I was doing and I wasn't going to lie any more than absolutely necessary. So I'd give it a try for a few months, you know. And all sorts of good things started to happen to me. It's like, maybe that's how the world works. Now, obviously, it doesn't work like that all the time, right? Because you can get sliced off at the knees. I mean, there's an arbitrary element to existence that you can't wish away. But that doesn't mean that there aren't bad strategies and good strategies. And so, I do think that one of the most fundamental existential questions is, like, if things aren't going well for you in your life is, are you absolutely certain that you're doing absolutely everything you can to put things in order? Because if you're not, then you shouldn't complain. Because you don't know to what degree you're actually contributing or even causing the circumstance. Now, that's a very annoying thing to think, and I'm not trying to blame the victim. You know, I know that people end up with lung cancer because they were exposed to asbestos, you know. I'm not trying to... Although I also know, too, that if you have lung cancer because you've been exposed to asbestos, that can be a tragedy or it can be hell. And to some degree, that depends on how you conduct yourself.
Well, I think the capacity for evil is something that is not easily distinguishable from strength. You know, and I mean, my knowledge runs out at this level of analysis in some sense. The world seems to be structured so that we can act for the good and we can act for evil. And I think that's associated with self-consciousness. And I think that's illustrated in the story of Adam and Eve. When Adam and Eve become self-conscious, the scales fall from their eyes. They realize that they're naked. And to realize that you're naked is to understand your vulnerability. That's why Adam and Eve clothed themselves right away. Oh no, I'm naked. I can be hurt. Okay, I can be hurt. I have to clothe myself. I have to protect myself in the future. You actually become aware of that in a way that animals aren't. Well, what does it mean that you're naked? It means that everyone else is too. What does it mean that you can be hurt? It means that everyone else can be hurt too. It means that you could hurt them. And that's why the knowledge of good and evil goes along with the knowledge of nakedness. That took me a long time to figure out. It took me about 30 years to figure that out. So why are those two things conjoined? Oh yes. When you understand that you're vulnerable, you understand that everyone else is vulnerable. And then you have the option of exploiting that. And so that's what transforms human beings to some degree from animals. Because a predator just eats you. But a human being can play with you and will for all sorts of reasons. Now, the capacity to do that, though, why is the capacity to do that, let's say, useful? Well, it's useful to be strong and not to have to use it because it makes you formidable. And I think that you have to be formidable in order to move forward properly in the world, even to get through obstacles that aren't just to get through obstacles. You have to have some strength of character. You have to have some commitment. And some of that is, there will be a cost if you interfere with me. It'll be the minimal cost necessary. Let's say if you've got yourself under control. It will be the minimal cost necessary. But do not be thinking there won't be a cost. And I don't believe that if that's not built into your character, then you have no strength, and you certainly have no strength when you're pushed by someone who's malevolent. A bully, if you're like that, if the bully pushes you, and your response is, there will be a cost for pushing me, and you will pay it, then the bully will go elsewhere. And we know that too from studies of bullies. Like even childhood bullies, they push around the kids, and then they find the ones that retreat and withdraw, and they bully them. So, you might think, well, usually children are bullied because of some abnormality. That's a very common idea. It's like, there's a guy named Dan Olweus, a very smart Norwegian psychologist, and he studied bullying for a long time as a precursor to fascism, by the way, so that was his interest. He said his analysis indicated that at least 3/4 of children have some obvious abnormality that could be the focus of bullying attention. It might even be your name. It doesn't take much of a genius bully to come up with a good way of making fun of your name. Or you're too tall, or you're too short, or your brother's too tall or too short, or there's something. It isn't the abnormality that is the cause of the bullying. The abnormality might become the focus of the bullying, but part of the cause is the withdrawal in the face of the bullies, because the bully thinks he can get away with it. Well, and it's also the case with children who are preyed upon by adult predators. Like adult predators of children look for children who are easily cowed and who won't put up a fight. So, for example, if you're teaching your children to be terrified of strangers, that's really not a very good strategy. You want kids who are confident and who will make a noise if someone messes about with them, and who are, and so that characterological strength has to be built in. This is how I think reality lays itself out. And I think we all know this. You're not driven by your past like a clock. You're not deterministic. You are to some degree, because you're limited. You're a limited creature. You've got rules that you run by and all of that. You're not omniscient. But you're not driven by the past. What you do instead is confront the potential of the future. That's what's in front of you. So it's a domain with multiple pathways, and that's what's always in front of you. You could go there, you could go there, you could go there. There's an array of choices that confront you. You confront that as soon as you wake up and become conscious in the morning. And then there's all this potential that's there in front of you. And you use your ethical choice to determine which of those possibilities will become actual.